This podcast is made possible by listeners like you. Go to our website at wdtatpodcast.com and click on support to learn how you can be part of this effort to learn how to have better conversations, increase compassion, and build bridges, not walls. You can make a one-time donation or become a patron for as little as $1 a month and receive patron-only benefits. Thanks to all of our patrons at any level for your support. You are what makes this happen and makes this podcast possible. Thank you. Now let's get into the interview. In this episode, we try something a bit different. I'm calling it Practice Makes Better. Today, my friend Gary Goodson helps me out with an experiment in practicing what we're preaching. We have a discussion about whether science and faith are compatible, and then we reflect on how we did trying to have a hard conversation together. I hope to make this a regular contribution to the podcast to help demonstrate and reflect on real, live, difficult conversations. So let's get into it. Welcome to the podcast where we talk about things we're not supposed to, learn how to talk about hard things, and talk to people about what makes them different. This is the We Don't Talk About That with Lucas Land podcast, where we do talk about that with me, Lucas Land.
It's never the right place or time. It's imperceptible to the eye. It's never the right place or time.
Well, I'm welcoming back my first repeat guest on the podcast. Welcome back to We Don't Talk About That, Gary Goodson.
Thank you, Lucas, for having me back.
Gary has agreed to be my guinea pig a bit for something that I'd like to do more of on the podcast. I spend a lot of time talking about ideas that can help us have better conversations, which I love. And then I also kind of talk about topics, but usually from the perspective of like, what do we not know about this? And not as much a back and forth kind of discussion where I'm actually disagreeing with somebody. And so I want to do more of that, but to be honest, I'm a coward, and and I've been kind of nervous about how to do that and do it well. So Gary has agreed to be my guinea pig for today. So thanks, Gary.
Yeah, no problem. I guess it's sort of an experiment in a way.
Yeah, and in your episode, you and I talked about us doing this for many years, and so yeah, I am kind of, I think, still a little nervous. So I invited you because I know that you and I are going to, in some ways, get along. And maybe the thing I'm afraid of this time is that you and I will agree too much on whatever topic we choose, since we've had these conversations.
Yeah, and I had similar thoughts, but a lot of discussions before were on email, so we'll see how an actual person-to-person discussion goes. Yeah. So the goal for these conversations, I haven't picked a name yet, so you could give your feedback on what you think. Maybe something like Tough Talks, or I kind of like Practice Makes Better. Yeah.
I don't know what you think about that one. Or Rubber Meet Road. So the idea is that we're trying, for the goal for these conversations will be to practice having good conversations by getting it wrong and then reflecting on it and trying to do better. And so that's kind of the goal. And I want to each time kind of set some ground rules for the conversation. So it's not really, this is not Jerry Springer free for all.
Yeah.
So some of the ground rules are be respectful and kind, but also don't hold back. I don't want it to be polite just for politeness sake, and I don't want to not say something just because we're trying to be nice. I don't want it to be a nice conversation, but I want it to be respectful and kind. I don't know if that distinction makes sense. Discussing ideas and not people. So whether it's attacking you or me, attacking each other, or even attacking the people maybe that have the ideas that we're talking about, or straw men,
Yeah.
those are always great in conversations. And then also to be curious and ask questions. And one thing to maybe mention is that not all questions are created equal. So an example might be that instead of saying like, why do you watch these, the TV show is going to be my neutral sort of example.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you watch trash TV? So that question kind of assumes, it makes a value judgment, and assumes the answer. Like it's sort of a very pointed question in maybe a negative way.
Yeah.
A better question might be, what is it that you like about that TV show? So I might not like the same TV show, but I can ask you, like, what do you like about it?
Yeah, exactly.
And then I also have my timer ready. So we're trying to keep equal time. I know that sometimes can be a hard thing for me personally. Not one person dominates the conversations. So maybe no more than like 5 minutes at a time.
Okay.
How does all of that sound to you?
That sounds like good ground rules. I can agree with those.
Okay. All right, good. So the topic that you and I decided to talk about is one that we've talked about a lot. Can faith and science coexist, or are they incompatible? And so I'll give us 5 minutes. Oh man, where'd my timer go? Okay, give us each 5 minutes. And the first thing maybe that would be good is to just give like your own background with this question, like maybe where you started and where you've come to. Okay. To kind of give an overview of your journey, just so we kind of are understanding each of our context. And if you're ready, I'll let you go first.
Sure, yeah, I can go first. So just to give a brief background, I'm a son of a Lutheran pastor, and I grew up in a small Texas town of about 600 people. And I just say that because the town itself was probably a little more religiously conservative than my parents were. Then we started moving around, and I would say that my first doubts probably came about God and religion came about in high school. I spent a short summer saying that I was an atheist. But looking back now, I know that was more like the sort of sky god with the big bushy beard sort of dying, and me going into, I guess, a more like symbolic direction, but not getting there yet. Then I went to college. We both, Lucas and I, went to Texas Lutheran University for our undergraduate degrees. So we had to take theology classes there. So, started reading Paul Tillich. And I think that's where sort of at that point, my God was sort of the grounded source of all being God. But I also started reading a lot of Bishop John Shelby Spong, who actually came to our university and spoke one time. That was a real treat. But I was still having questions about, how science and religion or faith can interact. I moved to Japan, came back from Japan, and that's when I picked up Sam Harris's book, The End of Faith. And it was at that point that I realized that there was this whole other mode of thought that I hadn't been reading, skepticism, science, that were sort of answering questions that the religious community I was in either wasn't answering or couldn't answer at the time. And I found that really, really good for me. I mean, just from a sort of intellectual standpoint. But then at that point, I started, I was still involved, didn't consider myself non-religious or atheist at the time. It was just sort of like, okay, here's people answering questions that I had. I was in grad school at the time and studying English literature and hanging out with people and having great conversations after class and everything. And at one time, after class, I was talking to a friend, and it suddenly dawned on me that I had sort of defined God out of existence. And so basically God, for me at that time, personally had been just sort of like the Force in Star Wars, just this energy that permeated the universe, but really didn't interact or do anything. And the question I had for myself at that point was, what was the difference between that type of God and no God at all? And the answer was, I guess, no God. And then it was sort of like intellectually, I was like, okay, I'm at peace with that. And then from then on, I guess you could say that I was an atheist or materialist. So that's just a short summary of how my religious thinking went on. I believe we started emailing around that time or a little bit before that about some of these questions. And of course, having been reading a lot of the new atheists like Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins and some of those others, I wouldn't ever call myself a militant atheist, but I was definitely more along the lines of what Sam Harris's thinking was in the faith of like, we have to get rid of all religion, we have to get rid of it. But I'm definitely not anywhere close to that these days. So, but getting to the question of whether or not science and faith can coexist, I know that during our emails we spent a lot of time haggling over definitions of what religion was or even what science was. And so before I answer this question, I was just going to say a couple things. First, I'm not going to try and define what faith and religion is, but I would say that any belief in a superstition or a supernatural phenomenon is probably not compatible with science. You can look at historical examples about astrology and how like the stars align, and scientists have sort of shown us, well, that has actually no bearing on people's personality or whatever. Or having just an ideology. It doesn't have to be a religious ideology, but having an ideology is highly likely not to be compatible with science, just because science will probably at some point either show that your ideology isn't true, or it may not be the most have some things in it that are not true. An extreme example might be racism as an ideology. People believing that one race is superior to another, but science is showing us that actually no, there is no such thing as race, and all groups of people are pretty much the same. And it's taken science. That ideology is butting up against that, and so you have to, with the. So to bring it back into religion, so as far as faith and religion sort of embraces either of those two to whatever degree, I would say that that they probably can't coexist.
Okay,
is that right? At 5 minutes?
That's your alarm. That's your alarm.
My alarm.
So,
well, good. I was pretty much done with the deal.
Yeah. That was good. I think 5 minutes is probably about right. So, yeah. Okay. That was really, really good. I think I'll maybe respond later to some of the things you said, but I'll give a little bit of my own background. So I used to say in seminary that I was baptized and confirmed as a Methodist, and then I spent time in a Bible church where I followed a girl in high school, and then kind of a evangelical quasi-charismatic church for another part of high school, and then went to a Lutheran university, worked at some Lutheran camps, and worked in a Lutheran church as a youth minister. Then I became Episcopal when I got married and worked in an Episcopal church. And then I went to a Baptist seminary, and then after seminary added an Anna to my Baptist and became a Mennonite. And that's kind of where I am now as far as faith journey and background. It's kind of wound its way through a lot of different denominations and different types of Christianity. So I appreciate having that varied experience. But I do, consider myself a Christian in the Mennonite faith now. I spent some years, including our undergrad years, as a pretty solid evangelical / fundamentalist in some ways. I don't think I ever went kind of fully fundy, but there was a lot, I think, through the churches and youth groups I was a part of in high school, that I found a lot of life in and vibrancy in the people that I knew that I was with and a part of in church. and liked that a lot. After high school, I lived in Denmark for a year as an exchange student, and I remember feeling at that time like, oh, this is kind of a test of my faith, right? Because though Denmark is like a Lutheran country, the state church in Denmark is still Lutheran. There's a lot of secularism, and whenever I did go to church, which wasn't often, there was almost nobody in church on a Sunday morning.
Oh, wow.
Christmas and Easter, definitely people were there. And so I felt like I was, owning my faith for the first time, and I would have my devotionals with, what was it? Oswald Chambers' devotional book, whatever, My Utmost for His Highest. That's what it was called. And I remember visiting this island with one of my host families, and my host mom's sister. We were kind of walking around this island, and I was making these comments about, how people don't really have faith here, and some comments like that, very kind of naive comments. And I remember her kind of pushing back and saying, well, just because we don't go to church or don't do the things that you kind of assume doesn't mean we don't have faith. And that really struck me. Then fast forward, during college, I worked at a Lutheran camp in Colorado called Sky Ranch Lutheran Camp that had a very strong like social justice emphasis. And so all of a sudden, like a lot opened up to me. It challenged me in some ways, but it also felt like it really opened up that faith could also be about justice and social things, and kind of, really, really changed how I thought about some of those things. And then, working in churches, I connected with this kind of emergent church thing that was happening. I remember being on like a postmodern theology forum for a while. And so again, beginning to like expand my ideas about what faith is and what it could be, and challenge some of the things I thought it was. And then when I decided to go to seminary again, I went to seminary just to learn, because I was interested in continuing those conversations I was having, but like digging a lot deeper and understanding more. I have the benefit of looking at the timer, so I know I'm almost out of time. I should get like a web timer or something we could share. Anyway, so I never went through like losing my faith, or I feel like I did go through deconstruction, but not in the way that some people talk about, like really abandoning or walking away and feeling like they were an atheist because they just couldn't deal with it anymore. So I still consider myself a person of faith. I believe in God. We could talk about maybe what that means, but I guess that gives a little bit of a context. I didn't really answer whether faith and science are compatible, but my time's up. So I don't know. Yeah. Gary, do you want to add anything to, or ask a question to me?
I guess I could just ask, do you think they're compatible?
Oh, thank you so much for asking. I really appreciate that. I do. Although I still think I struggle with how to articulate it, because I remember reading Stephen Jay Gould when I was in Bolivia the last time. And I remember you and I think, having conversations about his way of talking about this question. So he talks about non-overlapping magisterium. I think that's his term for it.
Yeah.
Basically, the idea, his idea is these are two separate realms that are really tasked with answering different questions, and so they don't overlap for him. He says science is over here in this realm working on understanding the natural world, and faith is really answering questions about meaning and questions that science doesn't answer, right? So that's one way to think about it, is that they don't overlap. But I don't, again, I feel like I'm not 100% sure how I feel about it. It has the benefit, that idea has the benefit of not I don't know, not really rocking the boat too much. You can just kind of say like, well, science is over here doing its thing, and we can say that science is fine, and then faith is over here doing its thing. I think the problem happens when things that we believe in I think what's happened through history is like things that were part of the world of what it meant to believe in a faith, like Christianity, were often challenged by science. So whether that was Darwin and evolution, Galileo, I mean, there's so many times that science, exploring the natural world, came up with these ideas and evidence to suggest that what we had incorporated into our faith wasn't true. And that was over and over again really, really hard for the church to deal with. And so it seems like if you just take Stephen Jay Gould's idea, then you're still stuck with, well, what happens when science says something that challenges faith again, or our definition of God, or our understanding of what faith is? Like, that's the idea that our God and our faith is the God of the gaps. And then science just keeps making it smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller.
Yeah.
And so I think one thing that I struggle with is to hold on to faith. You know, I don't necessarily want to become Deepak Chopra, and that I think that what was that documentary that you and I both probably watched? What the bleep do we know?
Yeah.
What the bleep do we know? Where it's like, oh, okay, there's some sciencey stuff. Yep, some quantum mechanics, and then all of a sudden it veers off and it's like, yeah, you can just manifest things and they're gonna be real because reality is all in your brain, and it's like, what is happening? So, I mean, I would say that's an example of like completely overlapping the two, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But I feel like I can't have them be completely separate for that problem of God just being a God of the gaps. I have to find a way for them to maybe be integrated more. And oh man, I should make, at this point in this argument or conversation, I should make like a claim that you can really react to and respond to.
Yeah. Because I was going.
Maybe the claim is that they can be. The claim is that I do think faith and science can be integrated. Okay. I'm not sure I can completely articulate how or what that would look like, but I do think that they're compatible, and that part of the work of people of faith, obviously, if you don't have faith, then you don't need to worry about integrating them, but is to find how we integrate faith and science. And to avoid getting bleeped by my timer, I'll let you respond.
Okay. It's interesting because once you brought up Gould, I was trying to formulate a response in my head, and then you sort of went and gave my response for me, sort of. Because I was going to say that, like, the problem with the two separate realms is just what you said. Like, science just keeps coming along. Gould is postulating that there is an area, at least as far as like human experience in the natural world, that science wouldn't be able to get to at some point, or try at least attempt to explain. And then, just like you said, that's where the God of the gaps, things comes in. And I don't know, I mean, like, it's interesting. It was interesting listening to you, I guess, struggle to sort of go around that, because and it's good that you sort of made a statement then, because I was like, well, sounds like we're sort of, our discussion is more about like trying to figure that integration out. And I'm not like for me, I'm like, well, I don't think it can, like, just like you said, like, it's not an issue that I'm dealing with anymore, except maybe, and I was thinking like, where would that integration like be an issue? And I guess I'll just say that, yeah, I disagree, because mainly because at some point science will butt up against the belief, and then the believer, like you sort of articulated, has to make a decision at that point whether to reject the science. I guess there's three options, maybe. One is to reject the science, reject the belief, or to live with the cognitive dissonance of the two. So you just accept both, and somehow you rationalize it and move on with your day. But I think, and a lot of what, what I guess maybe the new atheists or even the skeptical community might say is that is when those two sort of interact in sort of like a real world sort of scenario, and I don't want to touch on too controversial topics. I guess I'm trying to think of one that would be benign
Do it.
for us to talk about. Just because, I mean, the abortion one comes to mind right away, but I don't think that would, but it might be, or maybe it's just, we could, religion in school, prayer in school, because people believe they need to, or evolution, maybe we could talk about, evolution, where that's butting up against the more, a more conservative view of religion, and we, in a secular sort of democratic society, we want to educate our children with the best knowledge we can. But people of faith also want to protect, their culture and their way of being, and feel threatened by this teaching. And so that's a point where it'd be nice if those two could coexist. But I don't, like, something has to give at that point. Either we're going to teach science and evolution in school to the public, or not, and it's going to get dumbed down, or it's going to get changed, which does happen in some public schools, or we start giving, or what happens is they just some groups decide that we need to have more private schools, or more religious private schools, where they can teach the kind of things they want to teach, because we haven't figured out how to get that integrated and to have both at the same time.
Yeah.
Well, are you done? You're
yeah,
good?
I'm done.
You're done?
I know I didn't use my 5 minutes, but
you didn't. That's fine. So one, I want to respond to a couple things I think that you said that I think are points where we kind of disagree. Because you said in your initial kind of introduction that wherever there is superstition or supernatural phenomenon, belief in those things, that it's going to be incompatible with science. So I think a lot of us have found, okay, well, we don't believe that epilepsy means you're possessed by a demon anymore. And so there's not a conflict anymore with science. And I guess that's what you're saying. Like you gave sort of those three options. You're either going to have to reject science, reject the belief, or live with a cognitive dissonance. And I feel like I do live with some of that cognitive dissonance. And I think another way maybe to think about it, that maybe people of faith that are in my same position, not fundamentalists, not rejecting evolution, not rejecting science, but trying to integrate the two, would say is that we live with paradox. And on the one hand, I don't want to sound like I'm just trying to wave a magic wand and get rid of cognitive dissonance, that I might affirm some historical beliefs of the church that I can't explain. There's some mystery element to it that feels mystical, and I don't understand. I can't maybe logically or rationally argue with you are true, but I don't feel the need for them to require me to reject science necessarily. And so then for me, it becomes, now I'm living with paradox, not necessarily cognitive dissonance. And maybe that's semantics. And you, here I'm playing your side. So I'll stop playing your side. I'll let you play your own side. Sorry, Gary.
Oh.
And I just, I have a hard time because I struggle in the middle with saying things that I do feel like are more, for me, in my belief system, my worldview, are mystery and mystical, and I'm not trying to claim that they can be proven by science. I don't understand them. I guess maybe one pushback I might have is the idea that science is going to, you said this earlier, science will eventually like answer all of those questions. We just haven't gotten there yet. And I tend to think, well, maybe there are realms that, or things that exist in the universe that we don't completely understand, and that science, perhaps because it's based on human beings and their five senses being able to understand, detect, name, and understand certain phenomenon, that it's possible that there are things outside of that. I don't want to get too like new agey and too woo woo about it, yeah. but I do want to say, like, I think there is something for me to acknowledging that there is a limitation to science, and I would say that it's our limitation as humans, the instruments that we can create that still have to operate within our five senses somehow, and that we're cognitively have to like work through with our own brains. And we know that it's already pretty difficult for us as human beings because of our brains to imagine some of the scales that science works at, that operates at. Like for most people, relativity doesn't make sense, quantum mechanics doesn't make sense, and we can operate in sort of an abstract or theoretical world, not entirely theoretical. I know there's things that are measured and instruments that are like detecting those sorts of things, but in general, our brains just aren't even made. And it makes me wonder, like, then what's the limitations of our ability to understand things that could be, maybe beyond the abilities of science?
Yeah.
Okay, I got your turn.
My turn. So when you talk about like the mystery and the mystical, are you speaking of awe, or are you actually speaking about like something you don't know? Because
yeah, I think it's something I don't know. I think it's something. It goes to the last point about the limitations of science, that I live with a paradox for certain things because I have to figure out how to integrate them, but also because I think, well, there may be some limitations and some things that I just don't understand, and I can't explain, and maybe science won't be able to. I don't know if that.
Yeah. No, I think I agree with you that we're definitely limited by, as you said, our five senses and what we are able to, I guess, explore and see. I mean, we live on a planet in the middle of a giant universe, so like there's just going to be things we're not going to be able to confirm, theories that we might not be able to test. But I think I felt like most of what you were talking about exists in the material world, I guess. So even if it's mysterious, or even if we can stand in awe of it, it's still existing in a world that it could be tested. So we. You spoke for our five senses, so we know that certain animals, or even plants, can see colors or hear sounds and see spectrums of light that we can't see. But it took science for us to discover that. But so there might be something like that exists in a universe that we're unable to detect at the moment because of those limitations. I guess you could dark matter might be like one of those things. We can't see it. We only know it's there because we see its gravitational effects. So we know that it's everywhere in the universe, but we have no way to detect it outside of its gravitational effects. And so is it going to be a mystery forever? I mean, when I said like that science would eventually get there, I meant more that not that it would. It could be that we go a million years in science, but from the limitations you described, we just can't get there. Maybe there's some physics limitations to what we can actually explore and test that we will never get to those truths. And I can definitely agree with that. But but the process itself, like that's a limitation of us. It's not necessarily a limitation of the process of science. Like if the correct tools were there, we could discover those mysteries and figure out what they really mean. I think that's what I meant. That's what I meant more about that. But I totally agree with you that, there are things out there that we don't know. And, the universe is a big place. I'm also, I mean, when I asked you about whether you meant awe, because I do stand in awe of how big the universe is and the things that we don't know and the time scales. I was just listening today about, the 10 million years ago was happening in the earth. And I was like, man, 10 million years, that's so long, and it's,
Yeah.
It's a big number. And you think about how long we live. We only live like 100, 80 to 100 years. And you're right. We can't really wrap our minds around what 10 million years or a billion years really mean, but there was so much life going on the planet at the time, so many geological processes going on that we only know about from the fossil record. And so, I mean, that's part of the reason I like science, is because it does, reveal those things to us, and we can think about them, even if we can't truly comprehend what it means, to be that old, or to be that, to be billions of light years across, and whatnot. To get back to your paradox, I don't think I understand what you're saying, and so like I guess like it's not really for me to tell people how they need to like deal with their cognitive dissonance, or what they
don't
need.
Be so nice, Gary.
Yeah.
Don't be too nice.
Don't be too nice. Because we do live in a world where everybody has different life experiences and things. We all have to learn how to get along. So like I want people to be able to live and be happy and believe what they want to believe. So I'm not gonna like begrudge you that. I guess my question might be, how do you live with that paradox, I guess? Like you mentioned it being like a mystery and stuff like that. And you mentioned that you can't really argue with it rationally. Was that my 5-minute timer there? I guess my question would be, how does one live with that paradox? I find it like I couldn't live with that paradox or the cognitive dissonance. Like I felt like I needed to like land on one side or the other.
Right.
And that's sort of how I try to live my life now. I try not to, because I also mentioned sort of ideologies earlier. I try to be open. there's definitely things I believe in, but if science came and said, that's kind of BS, I might be like, I would hope that I'm open enough to, okay, maybe I need to, take a step back and question what's going on there. Because I can't live with that sort of, that dissonance. So I guess my question to you is, how do you live with that paradox?
Yeah. Well, I think, it's a good time for us to maybe kind of make a couple of last statements and then do a little meta reflection on the conversation. That's a really good question about living with paradox and how do I live with it. I think part of what made me nervous about doing this kind of conversation, and even as we were talking, I felt myself struggling to I make a claim, right? Like take a stand and make take a stance and then see what happened. Because I think over the years, as I've learned and grown and tried to, do what I'm trying to do on this podcast, have better conversations, listen to different people, get better at not just arguing, but growing. And a lot of that work means you have to start holding things more loosely, and you're not as militant. You're not the fundamentalist. You're not kind of black and white thinking about everything. And so, I do think that's helpful with how do you live with paradox? Well, I'm a person of faith, but I also believe in science, and sometimes those things bump into each other, and I have to think about, which one what do I think about this, or what does it mean for what I believe? But I'm not trying to necessarily separate them into distinct categories or areas of my life or my thinking. I'm okay with them kind of bumping into each other. Mm-hmm. And I think it's that black and white thinking a little bit too, that I not having so much black and white thinking about it means that I can say, well, I'm both, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
And I think that's, it feels like a contradiction, I think, probably to somebody like you. And I totally understand that. And it's not very satisfying maybe, because then I'm not choosing a side either. I'm really choosing to just kind of live in the middle, and that that can be problematic too. And, as we've kind of already mentioned. So anyways, okay. I'll pause my reflections, because I have more maybe reflections on having this conversation. But any last words that you want to say for materialism and skepticism to sort of wrap up your side of this conversation? Yeah.
I guess just I think I can be an advocate for skepticism and critical thinking and I think that I think that scientific belief and faith have a difficult time coexisting. I think one can be religious and be skeptical and a critical thinker at the same time, despite the paradox. So I would just encourage everybody to read more about that and to try to practice that more in their life.
Yeah. Well, and I would say you haven't always thought that way about it.
No, I haven't. Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, like early on, it was, it was probably more like a kid with a new toy. Like when I started reading the New Atheist, I was like, okay, yes, you're right. You're exact. Religion needs to be stomped out. We need to, everybody needs to think this way. I don't think wasn't that long of a period, because it's, you find out pretty quick you got to live with other people, and also that you can't. It's almost impossible to change somebody's mind about something. They have to get to it on their own. So, really it's more about teaching how to think and how to be a critical thinker than it is about throwing facts at somebody to try to convince them of something. So, but it took a little while for me to learn that.
Yeah. So I think one thing that is hard in these conversations is being able to pause and stop, especially you and I. Like, we enjoy it and we're good friends, and we could keep going about this, I think for a while, because it's an interesting conversation and there's enough disagreement that we could kind of wind our way through some different tangents or different questions. But one thing that I think is good is being able to stop. And so we're just going to take a couple of deep breaths right now as we sort of end this conversation.
Okay.
I don't know if the mic's picking up my breathing or not.
A little bit.
Okay. So Gary, how do you feel right now after, we just had that conversation? How do you feel?
I feel pretty good. I feel like we may have covered some of the same ground a little bit, but I think there was some new ground that was covered, and I felt like it was a little bit more personal than the email exchanges we used to have. So I kind of like that.
Yeah. I liked being able to kind of go back and forth immediately, and it did give a different quality than when we've had email conversations. Mm-hmm. I think I feel good about the conversation. I do feel like I was saying earlier that I had a hard time trying to nail myself down on what do I believe, or like making a claim, trying to and I think I avoid that. And there's something that's good about avoiding that, and there's something that's not so great about avoiding that. So and that was the thing that was probably hardest for me. So my next question was, what was hard about it for you?
I think what was hard is that since we've had this conversation a lot, like I found myself, like I was trying to jot down notes and being like, okay, can I ask a question? Because you want to be able one of your ground rules was to try to be curious and ask questions. I was trying to like, but we've gone over enough, or you were explaining well enough that I was like, okay, well, I guess I don't need to ask that question. You've answered it. And I think, but just in general, trying to find one of the difficult things about these conversations is that it doesn't, like, there's a tendency to see it as a debate, instead of like a conversation or a discussion. Where you don't necessarily need at the end to say there was a winner or a loser, or that there's an actual conclusion to things. And so, like, trying to temper my like need, or the feeling that I needed to sort of score points or whatever, and just be like, no, just sit back and let the conversation go and try to ask a question. I think, because I find that's what I find difficult in having conversations in social media. Is like the immediate intuition is to go out there and try to like score points and be like, no, this is what the way things are. They're not that way. Instead of trying to have like a productive conversation. So,
I have that same feeling. I've had that same feeling in other interviews. Well, mainly the interview I did with Sam Doyle, where we tried to talk about the LGBTQ inclusion in the church. And then I have an interview with someone from my hometown that's very different politically from me, and to talk about like what why are we so different when we're from the same town and grew up in the same place and everything. And in both of those conversations, I had that I think the feeling that you're describing, where like people are making points and I have to respond, like I have to react, and that I'm failing really. Like if I don't respond and correct them or say what I need to say, that somehow I'm failing myself, and I'm failing, I don't know, my people or my side. I'm not sure. And that I struggle with that a lot in those two conversations in particular. And that's a part of why I want to do these conversations. And it's why I'm really nervous about doing them, is that feeling. I think.
And there has to be a balance between, say, gently, I wouldn't say correct, but gently getting the point across and pushing back, and versus sort of like reverting into a debate mode where you feel like you have to like be correct about it. You know what I mean? Like there must be a balance between there, because you're right. You can't just leave certain things hanging, depending on what's being said.
Or if I leave things hanging, then I feel like I've agreed tacitly to something. And I don't think that's always the case. I think it's okay sometimes for us to realize, I think what you're saying too about social media, we always feel like we have to respond, and it kind of trains us to feel that way about if we don't respond, we're agreeing. And on the one hand, I do think we should speak up about things that we don't agree about, but we also don't have to always speak up either. It's not my job to correct everyone that I don't agree with, or and maybe, I don't know, trying to figure out when to speak up and when not to. Yeah, that's a hard, a tricky part of those conversations. Is there anything that you didn't say in our conversation that you wished you did say?
I don't know. It's amazing to me sometimes when we have discussions how quickly the time goes. So I think I got in, I did make some notes before discussions. I think I got most of the main points I wanted to get into. I think I would have liked to explore more about the intersection of faith and science in like real world situations. I touched briefly on it when I talked about public schools, because I think that it's easy to talk about it sort of theoretically, or just, individually how you're reacting to things. But, some of these things do have consequences in the real world, whether it's political or whatnot. And so it would have been interesting to sort of talk about that and see how science and faith collide in sort of real world situations. But that possibly could be a discussion for another day.
Yeah. There were a couple of things I think you probably mentioned too that I didn't respond to, like the idea that ideologies like racism, for example, are examples where we believe in something, have beliefs that get corrected by science. Like it's very clear from the science that race is something that was constructed, that you can't construct but from DNA or from genetics, and science pretty much shows that it's nonsense. So then we have to deal with the social constructs of race and racism, but the science has helped really deconstruct it as a belief, right? And we didn't talk very much about that, and that's a good like real world example. But I can't. I agree with you about the practical examples would have been helpful. Maybe to talk about like how prayer. I don't know about prayer in school, but like evolution or I don't know. I don't know what a good example would have been, but I think that would have been helpful too. Is there anything that you did say that maybe you wished that you didn't say?
No, I don't think so. I think, no, I didn't, this go around, I'm much more tempered, so I don't think I was.
Yeah.
There was
I don't feel bad.
I think I would have taken back, but.
Right. I know. Yeah. It's probably easier to think of the past conversations we've had, things that we would maybe take back. I don't think I have anything necessarily I would take back, but it was hard for me, like I said before, to make a claim, to say, like when I said, okay, I need to say something that I actually believe in, saying, okay, I do believe faith and science can be integrated. There's a part of me that's like, oh, okay, I'm making a claim here, and am I going to be able to back it up? And am I, is Gary going to kind of pick that apart maybe, and then it's going to not make sense, and now I'll have to change my mind and say, oh, okay, maybe you're right, I don't agree with that, which I'm open to doing, I'm okay with doing, but as I said before, like it's hard for me sometimes to kind of put a stake down and say, like, I do believe this, and okay, now we can discuss it, but I'm gonna kind of stake a claim, and I think that's hard for some people, especially on certain topics. Like we want to, especially when we're trying to have better conversations. I think this is a good example, maybe for people, of what we're trying to do on the podcast is have better conversations. One danger is that you avoid talking about things that are important to you, to just be nice. Like I said in the ground rules, it's not about just being nice. Let's talk about the things that are important to us.
Yeah, that's. I had a couple thoughts when you were just saying that. Going back to like when I'm realizing now when we had going back to our discussion when you were. One of the things I've tried to do recently is not, going back to your don't attack the person, attack the ideas. I find it difficult when people are expressing, like for you during this conversation, you were saying, I believe this is what I'm thinking, and it's hard for me to say, well, you shouldn't think that, and it goes to, another example might be, I have friends who are really into alternative medicine. And so when they come to me and say something like, I'm taking these herbs for my cold, I don't want to say you shouldn't do that. Like, I'm like, well, if it makes you feel better, do whatever you want. Like I find myself waiting for those points where they're saying, oh, hey, I read that this thing helps do this. At that point I can come in and say, well, actually, the science is, a little bit pushing against that here. And I found myself doing that during our discussion, because I was trying to separate where you were saying, here's these ideas that we have that are out there, and here's my personal belief about those ideas. And I think, I was having trouble being like, well, Lucas, you shouldn't have that paradox. It's bad for you. Like, I'm not going to say that,
It is. That's a really interesting point to think about when in conversations, when there's an opening to have those conversations, to discuss ideas instead of people, and when people are expressing their values kind of, and it's not appropriate, or just doesn't seem like the right time, and sometimes that's maybe where we get ourselves in trouble, not always being able to tell the difference between when it's a good time to maybe jump in and start saying, especially when we're passionate about things like we talked about in the past, a new toy or new ideas to us, or things that are or just that are we're really passionate about. We can be quick to jump in and be like, well, actually, where we like you and I are male, so we're probably mansplaining to somebody if we're jumping in and actuallying somebody.
Exactly.
Well, Gary, thanks so much for being my guinea pig and testing this out. I mean, I think we can call it a success. I'm excited to try and do this with other people and other topics where, I don't know, maybe it's going to get kind of crazy and I might get more heated about something. I don't know what's going to happen, Gary, but you've helped to make it happen. So I really appreciate you taking the time to do this experiment with me.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Anytime. It's been a lot of fun.
Thanks for joining us today on We Don't Talk About That with Lucas Land. If you like what you hear, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any episodes. Help us spread the word by sharing it on social media. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram with the handle @WDTAT Podcast. You can also rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. We would love to hear from you. Leave us a voicemail by going to our website and clicking Send Voicemail. Your voicemail could be featured in a future episode. You can also email us at wdtatpodcast@gmail.com. Many thanks to Neil Curran and Infielder for the use of their music. You can find more of their music online at infielder.bandcamp.com. A final thought from Brené Brown. The willingness to show up changes us. It makes us a little braver each time. Until next time, keep showing up and keep being brave.
What are you gonna do?
Que le vaya bien.